Hi, welcome to the Oliver Fetter YouTube channel. Today, a word on steering racks. It's like probably like official day 3 of the ALH engine swap, and in real time, it's like my 15th day of being here screwing around with little things. So, as a general update, the engine is still out of the car. It will be going in the car soon, and this is kind of the last thing holding me up before putting it in, because my old steering rack, as you can kind of see here, looks horrible. It's like dry on the inside and like crusty, and this part shakes up and down so that it clunks, and it's smoked. The tie rods were actually somewhat in okay condition, but I opted for a full reset of fresh everything since it's going to be out. And I just wanted to cover kind of some steering rack replacement tips and things like that. And before saying anything else, the absolute best time to do this is while the engine is out of the car. So if you're gonna pull your motor and you think your steering rack needs some kind of attention, now's the time to do it. So first things first, a word on steering rack compatibility. I will lay these two the exact same way so you get the idea. So this one is original to my car. My car is a 1984, like a late 84. And this is a weird rack, actually. So if you look on the internet to try to find a steering rack for a Mark 1 to buy, it won't look like this. And this has kind of these full aluminum body, these two bigger flanges, and kind of everything about it is symmetrical. And what I found is it's actually kind of like an early 85, late 84, and not that many cars came with these particularly, or at least there's not many reproductions of them, because most cars at this point were being converted to power steering. So it's kind of like the alternative to power steering in the 85 era, but there weren't that many cars without power steering to my knowledge. So here comes the solution, which is that the 1984 and down Mark 1s came with a rack that looks like this. It's aluminum over here and a black steel tube that is round over here, not D-sectioned. And this is what you're gonna find, and what you can find parts for. Like, these are some nice, polyurethane rack bushings. They don't exist for this rack, only this style of rack. So it's easy enough, and so long as you have the fact that your car is manual and power steering or not, you will get the right rack. So this is a manual rack. Well, it's a manual steering rack, but it's also for manual shift transmission, and that's because it has the bracketing on there to mount your shift linkage mounts. So with that kind of history spew out of the way, so long as you get that right, your same mounting brackets will slip over these and it'll go in there no problem, one for one. Cool. So to get this in the car, unfortunately, and what's kind of tricky and or frustrating is that I'm almost inevitably going to completely ruin my alignment by putting this in, which I'm going to try to avoid and show steps to how to avoid, but I almost never successfully avoid doing so. And that's because basically every threaded joint, like this one, this one, this one, and that one, are all set to somewhere. And if you don't replicate it exactly when you put the new rack in the car, the toe will be wrong, period. And then the second kind of problem that you need to think about and look at is getting it centered. So this is how the rack came out of the box. You can see we got like 3.5 teeth showing on that side and like yay much sticking out over there. And this is how the rack came out of my car. We have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teeth showing or something like that. Tomato, tomato, but what's important is that it needs to go back in and be centered. And the best way to do that, I've found usually, is to actually run the new rack through its travel, like find its stops. So like, 1, 2, 3 stop, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stop, and then you go to 2.5 if there's 5 total turns. And that's the middle of your steering rack. And the other thing of a notice of importance is that these don't really have like a keyway that lines them up. Theoretically, you could put this onto the intermediate steering shaft in any orientation, but this kind of notch right there is what lets the bolt, the pinch bolt, go through and actually do something. So it will determine how it goes on, and that could be frustrating because I imagine if you're like one spline off either way, it probably won't go through. Anyhow, that's the alignment rant. So there's these washers that are on the old rack, and none of my new stuff came with washers. And you know, most modern car steering racks don't have washers here. You just put the tie rods on until they bottom out. And I imagine they're on there less for like an alignment adjustment, because you would never align a car from its inner tie rods, but more as like a keep it from rotating off. So my solution to that today is some blue Loctite. I'm just gonna run these on all the way until they stop and dead end, and I'm going to put Loctite on these threads. Now when I pulled this out of the packaging, all these threads on both sides were covered in grease, and if they're covered in grease, they won't hold Loctite, and Loctite won't do shit. So clean them first, then use Loctite if you're not going to use the kind of lock nuts that are already on there. So I'm going to start with a centering check, because that's the first thing on my mind, is where is this rack at. And so I'm going to start from where they shipped it, which is like right here, and count turns. How many turns it takes to get to lock and how many turns it takes to get to lock the other way. So we have 1, 2, 2. Okay, so 1, 2. Now we're back at center the way it was shipped. Now 1, 2. Wow, that's really easy. Okay, so there you go. This one is a 4-turn rack, lock to lock, so it's not terribly fast. I just checked, and right now for my steering wheel to be centered would be like that, but that actually puts us slightly off of being centered true to the rack. So I would rather go ahead and put this on this way, which will have my steering wheel probably like 90 degrees off of center. But then this Mark 1 steering wheels aren't splined a certain way, so I should be able to just take it off and put it back on the steering wheel to a good orientation. And we're gonna go with right how it was shipped, which is beautifully centered, as our steering rack center point. And this is what I don't know is how far on the original racks ones are, and this could drastically ruin the alignment, which it kind of looks like the original rack has more threads sticking out than this. So even if I match up my tie rod ends to the length of the old tie rod ends, there's a strong chance it won't work, or that the alignment will be wrong. So I think today my method of choice for trying to get the alignment approximately correct is going to be to measure each one and then measure the total distance between tie rod ends before installing. And hopefully that gives me a chance at getting it correct. I'm also using new boots. The boots are the primary reason my rack failed. As you can see, it's really dirty and the boots are cracked. So definitely we'll be putting new boots on these. I just have to tighten these down first and then we can move on. So now a word on steering boots. These are kind of hard to find and hard to get right because they also vary with the rack. If you have a power steering rack, these are different. If you have this late 85 rack, they're different. And if you have this early rack, they're also different. And the main differences come down to like this side's opening versus this side's opening. So this theoretically stretches over this rubber grommet here. And this end should stretch over and fit in this groove. However, on this end, there is no groove. So that one would be wrong. That one would also be wrong, which means this one might be correct. And honestly, this one might also be correct for this side. I ended up buying 2 sets because I was so unconfident that they were the right ones. Okay, and I inadvertently discovered why the washers are on there, and that's because right now, when you turn it lock to lock, you actually hit the end of the joint. All right, well, after tooling around with this a little bit more, and thinking about it a little bit more. So there's no way you get the full lock-to-lock that the rack has when the tie rods are on, even with nuts, without nuts, anything. Because I still really don't have new nuts to use, and those are basically welded to the old one, I'm going to proceed with just running these all the way down. And I think, yes, technically you will lose a little bit of you will lose a little bit of steering angle because there's just not as much room for the rack to move back and forth. But I don't see that being a significant issue on the car, especially for what I'm using it for. I mean, I guess in the event of a like parallel parking job or a U-turn, it's possible I might notice the difference after this, but I'm doubtful. So now that we're here, we need to remeasure our lock-to-lock basically, because it's less than full 2 turns. Full 2 turns is the rack center, but it's not necessarily the rack center with the tie rods on it. So I want to recenter it to be centered with the tie rods on it. So we're going to go ahead and count. We got 1, and we're just going to go ahead and reset. So we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it's a turn and a half both ways. So that's 1, 1/2. And then 1, 1/2. Cool. So 1, 1/2. That's center. That's center with tie rods on. Okay, so I feel like I'm spinning my wheels here. These boots look correct. So one boot has this deep groove in it to go in there and is bigger, and one is smaller and smooth, which goes on that end. And this one might be honestly the right boots to this style of rack where both sides have the groove. Is what it looks like. So now I'm going to go ahead and center my old rack, and this is all the way at the end. So 1, 2, 3, 3.75. Damn, that's going to be hard to center. So you can see it did get a little bit more throw on my old steering rack. It's almost 4. It'll be an 1/8 turn. We're at like an 1/8 turn. It'll be like a 1/16 of a turn short of 2, because we're about an 1/8 turn short of 4. So it would look like 1, something like, well, that's 2 right there. Okay. Point being, I want to compare these two so I know how to set them up. I just want to measure to the jam nut from, we need a common point. These flanges are common points. Of course, this one isn't, so we're going to go from this one. We're going to go from the outside, inside, outside. Outside's close enough. From the outside of that one to where the jam nut ends on this side is 25 and 5/8. So if I do the same over here, we are at 18 and whatever that is, 5/16. We're just over a quarter, a 1/16 past a quarter. Hopefully that leaves us with enough thread. It looks like it might. Right there. That should be okay. And then I want to go center to center on the tie rod ends, which is of course at best an approximate measurement, but that's about 50 inches on the dot. So this rack, once we put the ends on, should be about 50 inches on the dot end to end, and hopefully that keeps the toe alignment like okay enough to drive for a little bit. It wasn't easy, we'll put it that way, to get these boots on. Have to be a little persistent with it for sure. And these just came with zip ties, which is fine. As long as you put them on there good and tight. And then the original kind of holding mechanism for these is still, I think, pretty nice for the ends of the boots. It's like this. Ow! but don't let it get you, because it will. Ow. Is these VW boot clamps. Ow! Just did it the same way multiple times. It makes it always makes it feel good. Hit it again. So, as it sits right now, this should all work. All I need to do is put these tie rod ends on and snug them down. And the jam nuts are where they should be. Though we can do a quick sanity check here in a second. I'll tighten them. And then a quick sanity check, which way is down. These tie rod ends face down when they're installed. And the joint on the inner tie rod should rotate, so theoretically we should be able to do this. Very nice. And its counterpart as well. Okay, after measuring this a few different ways, I think we're good. I think it's just tricky to measure steering racks. So, should have about the right numbers in there. We got these sweet bushings to put in. The rack mounts we'll wait on for just a second. And then this whole thing can go in the car at the same time. I've been putting this off for so long. Yay. That goes there. Ooh, we didn't clean yet. Ooh, to get this thing in here is a little bit of a shoehorning kind of exercise, but it's not too bad. I found you can run it all the way to the passenger side. And then... oh, I got this dirty too. No! No! Yeah, anyways, you can run it all the way to this side, and you kind of have to get clever with your rotations here, but the opening for this is kind of oblong, so you can just rotate it just so that it goes through. And we're coming back, and that's pretty close. Okay. So that's kind of what it looks like getting the full thing in and out. Now, probably the worst part of all of this is this. I mean, this boot works well, don't get me wrong, but it's a bugger and a half to get out of the way. So, like, you have to hold this boot up enough to see what's going on inside and then put it on. So, for instance, right now I actually have this up and somewhat out of the way. This shaft doesn't actually move once everything's connected, so you kind of just got to line it up and go for it. And that could be money or that could be trash. We're about to find out. This is where you could be a spline off. Okay, well, doesn't seem like we're a spline off. That was pretty easy. And now we get this thing approximately on its mounts. Okay, so I took a little hammering, a little massaging. Now I went in there. Imagine with probably any kind of new bushing that it's a little bit of a fight to put it in, but it is now in there. Ironically, this part wasn't so bad after you get it the heck out of the way. Well, that was kind of an adventure. Hopefully not too boring. Steering racks are a little tedious, so thanks for sticking in there. Appreciate ya. Have a good day out there. Ooh, and bonus content, if for some reason your horn doesn't work and you're sure the horns are hooked up correctly, the fuse isn't blown, and you have power at your horn button, the problem is that your steering column isn't grounded. And I just redid this with the existing ground wire I added when my horn didn't work, but there's still paint on this rack, so I think I am about to drill a small hole right here and change the wire's location. But pro tip, check your rack grounding.